because of my attempt to explore various angles of the Mishnah. Generally, we only accomplish one Mishnah per session, but I hope we derive good value from that Mishnah. So probably that's going to be our text for tonight. So if you have a text with you, then by all means take a look at it. Shimon beno Omer. Shimon, his son, says. Now, it doesn't say explicitly whose son it is, but as we have seen from the very beginning, there is a pattern here, initially generation by generation, and we are still continuing that kind of chronological study in which we had Hillel and Shammai. In last week we did Rabban Shimon. Omer Rabban Shimon was the grandson of Hillel Hazaken, and now we say, I'm sorry, not Rabban Shimon, Rabban Gamliel, excuse me, Rabban Gamliel Omer, that was last week, and Rabban Gamliel was the grandson of Hillel, and Shimon Beno would be the son of Rabban Gamliel. It's probable that this is the same Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, of which there were two. It is a bit confusing that way, but it's possibly not surprising because the son was named for the grandfather, and then his son was named for his father, and therefore we do find Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who is probably the speaker in our Mishnah, and then next week we're going to find Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who may be a different person. At any rate, Shimon Beno was clearly the son of Rabban Gamliel from last week, and the reason I draw attention to that will become apparent very soon. So what he had to say was, Kol Yamai Gadalti ben HaChachamim. All of my life, I grew up among the wise. So before we see what his message is, just that kind of contextual observation, all my life, I have been privileged to share the company of great sages. We can understand why. Because he was not only himself the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin in his mature years, but he was the son of the Nasi. He was the grandson of probably the Nasi as well. He was the great-grandson of Hillel, whom he never knew, but he's descended from the most prominent and most prestigious Torah personalities, and it's very likely that even as a young child, he would have shared the company of other colleagues of his father and his grandfather. So when he says, all of my life, I shared the company of great, wise sages, we can understand that surely this would have been true. He was a person, as I say, who was born into rabbinic royalty, if we can use that expression. It's also possible, just again for contextual purposes, that he was among the Harugei Malchus. I'm sure you know what I mean. The 10 sages who were put to death by the Roman executioners, each one in a more sadistic way than his peer. We narrate that tragic series of events in the liturgy on Yom Kippur and also on Tisha B'Av. It's the famous piyut of Asar Harugei Malchus, the 10 martyrs. So he may well have been one of them, because one of them was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and it may well have been this one. Okay, what is his message? So he says, all my life I grew up among the sages, v'lo matzasi leguf tov mishtika, and I found nothing better for the body than silence. And this is an echo of the famous Talmudic saying, which is an English aphorism as well. In the Talmud, it says, Mila besela, shtika b'shtayim, that a word is worth a sela. A sela is, let's say, a pound, but a pound in the days when a pound was a pound. Mila besela, shtika b'shtayim, that silence is worth 2. If a word is worth 1, silence is worth 2. And the English form, of course, is silence is golden. The full aphorism is silence is gold, speech is silver, which again conveys exactly the same idea. And that seems to be the teaching of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel here as well, in which he's praising the quality of silence. What's interesting is that he says lo matzasi laguf, because one can immediately express amazement at this statement. Surely the capacity of speech, the human capacity of words, and the ability to communicate by speech, by language, is man's greatest gift. The famous Targum Onkelos says that when Adam was created and God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living creature. That's what the Torah says. The Targum Onkelos says he became a speaking creature. L'ruach mamalala, he became a spirit that could speak. The gift of speech, the capacity of speech, we regard speech as something which uh, exemplifies the superiority of a human being over other forms of life. So how can it be that silence is so wonderful? We thought speech is wonderful, especially because it's only through speech, or primarily through speech, that a person can teach Torah, can learn Torah, can listen to Torah, can study Torah, and prayer as well, blessings as well. All forms of standard communication. There may be nonverbal communication as well, but communication involves speech for the most part. So what is this ironic praise of silence? So many of the Mefarshim point out, if you look closely at the words of the Mishnah, "V'lamatzasi laguf," I didn't find anything for the body better than silence. It could well mean that he is saying like this: among the wise, they speak about Torah, they speak about matters of the soul, matters of mitzvah observance, they speak maybe about matters of inspiring the community in appropriate ways. But when it comes to matters of the body, matters of the flesh, silence is the best approach. When it comes to matters of the body, so Irving Bunim in his commentary, Ethics from Sinai. So he says that when it comes to matters of food, drink, fashion, things that relate to the body itself, I'm sure David's boot camp is not included in this pejorative analysis. But when it comes to these kinds of frivolities, preoccupation with the latest in culinary possibilities, it says this should be diminished. Irving Bunim, who was a great raconteur, very popular on the speaking circuit, and as I've mentioned in the past, he was a businessman, a successful businessman. He was a great fundraiser, and he was very dedicated to Jewish causes. So he said, even at a dinner, a fundraising dinner to support a yeshiva or a Jewish school, he said the guests are more interested in talking about the menu than about the speeches. There was more interest in what's being served than the content of the evening itself. So so that's what he says about lo matzasi laguf. But Tversky, in his commentary on Pirkei Avot, Dr. Tversky understands this sort of formula. He takes it at face value that shtika, silence, the ability to remain silent. Actually, let's take a look at the rest of the Mishnah, because it's as we've seen consistently, the sayings, the separate teachings have a kind of internal association as well. So let's just look at the rest of the Mishnah. So lo matzasu tomi shtika, silence is golden. V'lo hamedrash ikar el hama'aseh, not the exposition is the main thing, but rather the action, the deed, ma'aseh. V'chol hamar bedvarim mevi chet, and whoever talks overly much brings on sin. So Tversky says how much marital strife and other types of relationship breakdown could have been averted if people took to heart the teachings of this Mishnah. If a person doesn't respond to every provocation, if a person doesn't spout what's on his mind, doesn't immediately, let's say, criticize or condemn. So he says that the limiting speech and recognizing the importance and the place for silence could have averted so much strife and so much suffering. Taking this a bit further, we have the famous passage in Erechin. The Gemara in Tractate Erechin speaks about Lashon Hara in a few different ways, and there's a beautiful midrashic description of the tongue, how the tongue is an organ which is hidden. Most of the time it's in the mouth, and Hashem has designed the human body with two gates, the teeth and the lips, which collectively could and should succeed in muzzling the tongue and retaining or somehow constraining the tongue. And yet the tongue is so wily and so active that those gates, and those gatekeepers are cast aside, and the tongue often is wagging in ways which are unhelpful. That's how the Talmud kind of dramatizes it. My father used to put it a little bit differently. He used to say that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Let that be a lesson to you. That the value of listening maybe exceeds that of speaking. And naturally, one could say about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that I grew up among the wise and I learned the value of silence, because by my silence I learned so much. Which gives rise, of course, to the Talmudic comment that if that silence is a favorable, is a good quality for the wise, how much more so for the foolish? If even the wise appreciate to be parsimonious with one's speech, then how much more so should the foolish recognize that, which probably they don't necessarily do. There's an anecdote, maybe apocryphal, about Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, for those non-Americans here, Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States in the 1920s, and he was known for being very sparing with his words. Once he wasn't able to go to church on a Sunday morning. Rather, he did go, and his wife wasn't able to attend. So when he came home, she asked him, "What did the preacher speak about today?" So he said, "Sin." So she said, "What did he say?" He said he was against it. He was against it. Another time, a man approached Woodrow Wilson at a dinner party and said to President Wilson, "I've made a bet with my friend that I could get you to say at least 3 words to me tonight. Can you say something to me?" He said, "Yes." "You lose." So, okay, these are just quips. But the point is that silence or the limitations of speech can have its place even among the wise. Actually, I just want to mention one other sort of a quip, which, like so many of these, aphorisms, there's the grain of truth to it. The pasuk says in Mishlei, in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 28, even a fool will be considered wise if he is silent. Even a fool will be considered wise if he is silent. And this has probably given rise to the saying, which I'm sure you've heard. I did a bit of research, actually. It's been variously attributed to Mark Twain, to Abraham Lincoln, and others. It's doubtful if any of those people said it. It's probably is anonymous. But the quip is, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Which probably, as I say, derives from this statement in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that even a fool is considered wise if he keeps silent. But I want to just say something a little bit more serious, based on that, as I say, probably quip, that there's a thought which I've heard attributed to the Kotzker of Menachem Mendel of Kotzk. And he said, what is the difference between the silent sage and the silent fool? And he said the sage doesn't mind being silent. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that sometimes people are sitting together talking about a subject, and if it's beyond the grasp of the fool, so he can't say anything, but he's troubled by it. Whereas the silent sage doesn't mind being silent. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. I'll just mention briefly, there's an occasion where it was a rabbinic conference about probably 100+ years ago, and Rav Chaim Brisker, one of the great Torah luminaries of the generation, was there, together with other Rabbanim. It was a convention of some sort, and I think maybe in between the sessions, Rav Chaim Brisker raised a particularly brilliant question about a Talmudic passage, and they were discussing it, and different answers were proposed, which he was refuting, and the matter was left unresolved. And sitting among them was Reb Yitzchak Blazer, Reb Itzele Petterberger, and he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, known as a great Musar personality, and he was a distinguished rabbi of the time, and he was there as well. He didn't participate in the give and take, and the thrust and parry, and in the conversation. And Rav Chaim Brisker thought to himself, look, the rabbi is distinguished, is dignified, is known for his fine character and for his activism, but perhaps Talmudic erudition is not his strength. Anyway, he went home that night, and in the base medrash, he happened to see on the bookshelf the sefer of this Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer. So he thought he's going to take a look and see what is the quality, whether it's profound or superficial. He opened it up, and he flipped through the pages, and he found what he had to say on that same passage that had been discussed. To his astonishment, he saw presented there the same question that he himself had asked, some of the answers that had been proposed, which were refuted, and a brilliant resolution to the question, all from Yitzchak Blazer. And with that, I don't know whether he went to apologize. I don't think he apologized because he hadn't said anything to him, but he realized how the rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer, was quiet out of humility because Reb Chaim Brisker had posed the question as if it was some brilliant insight that he had come upon. And Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer didn't want to say to him, well, actually, if you look in my sefer, you'll see the question, you'll see the answer. So he kept quiet. To me, this is the greatness, and that's a fulfillment of what we see here, Tov Mishtika. Obviously, that's at a very high level. Not every person, not every rabbi even, no doubt, would be capable of silence under those circumstances. But the classic commentary on the Mishnah has a different approach. I won't say altogether different, but a different angle, a different facet, which I think is very important. This is Rav Ovadia mi Bartanura. Rav Ovadia Bartanura was an Italian sage. Bartanura is the town in Italy, and towards the latter part of his life, he traveled to the land of Israel, where he lived in Jerusalem for the last years. I think quite a few years of his life, actually. He lived out his life in Jerusalem. I think he lived in, I'm trying to remember when, quite early, maybe the 16th century, maybe even earlier than that, maybe earlier than that. Can't remember exactly when. Anyway, he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah, which is one of the most fundamental commentaries that we have, Rav Ovadia Bartanura. And he says the meaning of this statement is when silence is an illusion, this praising silence is an allusion to the Gemara in Gittin, which says, Hane'elavim ve'enam olvim, shomim cherpasim ve'enam mashivim, Aleim hakasuv omer v'ohavai ketseis hashemesh b'gvuraso. Hane'elavim, those who are insulted, those who are attacked or harangued, ve'enam olvim, and they don't respond in kind, they don't return the insult or the denunciation. Shomim cherpasam, they hear their denigration, ve'enam meshivim, they don't respond. About such people does the Torah say, and those who love me are like the sun in its glory. The reference here is to a person who has been insulted, who has been provoked, and he has the strength of character and the self-respect to not respond. Like it says, Al ta'an ksil be'ivalto, do not answer the fool in his folly. This is the greatness of a sage, someone who has that humility and that self-control. I remember my Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Chait used to say, I heard it from him more than once, in the liturgy on the high holidays, on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur as well, one of the piyutim that we say each of those days has the phrase, Tole Aretz al Belima. Literally, it means the one who suspends the world on nothing. The simple meaning is that the planet Earth is suspended in space, and actually, if we appreciate the astronomy of it, it's extraordinary that our Earth is not pulled into the gravitational orb of the sun, in which case it would be incinerated. The fact that it turns on its axis, so the world can the globe, planet Earth, can be genuinely regarded as suspended in space. So God suspends the world in the globe in space. Tola aretz al belima, upon nothing. It says the Medrash, Zeha bolem piv b'shas mariva. This refers to someone who muzzles his mouth at a time of an argument, at a time of a quarrel. And that takes greatness. That takes exceptional self-control, and this is what it says in our Mishnah, and this is what Bartanura says it refers to, that someone who is silent in the face of provocation, a wise person has that capacity. But I want to tell you a beautiful interpretation of Kerem Hatzvi. Kerem Hatzvi, we've mentioned him quite often. He was Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Farber. He lived here in London. He was the rabbi for many years of the Dean Street Synagogue. Dr. Schmidt was a bit of a member there, I think. Am I right, Yaakov? Dean Street was the great synagogue, and it merged with Marble Arch, I think. Can you enlighten us?
I was the deputy for Dean Street, the
there you
member
have
in
it.
addition to Marble Arch. Yeah,
I
very
see.
fond of them, very lovely people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you have it.
They're still independent.
Are they? I see. But
Yeah.
they're just based at Marble Arch geographically.
Now they're in Central. They moved on.
They moved
Yes.
on. Okay. They're a bit
But
peripatetic.
people, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks you. So the rabbi there for many years was a very great man. And as we'll see very soon, he was a bit frustrated in his position there. His name was Tzvi Hirsch Farber. He was a scholar. He was a first-rate Talmid Chacham, but he was a world-class darshan. His gift of creative interpretation on the Chumash, on the Haggadah, on Pirkei Avot, on the festivals, on the Sidur, was most remarkable. Even today, he's not fully appreciated, probably because he lived in London. If he lived in New York, or if he lived in Vienna, or if he lived in Jerusalem, probably he would be, today, at least after his death, his books would be more widely studied. But anyway, he also has the distinction of being the great-grandfather of Sam Walden. So there you have it. So a bit of yichus all around. So he said like this. First, he says, Kol Yamai, take a look at the Mishnah again. Again, by paying close attention to the nuances, we get often a deeper meaning. Kol Yamai Gadalti, all my life. Kol Yamai sounds as if he's already in his mature years. So he's describing, he's looking back at his life, and he says, when I consider what I've learned, so, in all these years, Kol Yamai Gadalti Min HaChachamim. So he says, I discovered and I came to appreciate the value of silence. Says Reb Tzvi Hirsch Farber, a very clever idea. Let's say you've got a young man and he is a promising Torah scholar and he's in yeshiva and he learns about halachic erudition and he maybe gets smicha, he's ordained as a rabbi. Can he render halachic decisions where he is in the yeshiva or even in the community where his rabbi or his rebbeim are still teaching and active and the prominent Torah personalities? The answer is he's not allowed to. A person is not allowed to render a halachic decision in the presence of his master, in the presence of his rebbe. So therefore, if a person wants to spread his wings, so he'll leave the place where he studied and he'll go to another town and there he can paskin because he's the rabbi in that new community. But if he's in the, if he's in the company, if he's in the space of his rebbeim, so he doesn't have a chance to do that. Doesn't have a chance to paskin and to kind of he can't speak out. So he says, this is what I've learned. All of my life, I shared the company. I remained in the company of the wise, even though it meant that I couldn't speak. Of course, he could speak in a casual way, but I couldn't discourse. I couldn't preach. I couldn't render halachic decisions because it's wrong for me to do so in the presence of people greater than me. I think what Rabbi Farber is hinting to here is the value of a person, a scholar, a young scholar, let's say, reaching his maturity under the tutelage of great people. And he, I think, is kind of criticizing a pattern which we do find in some circles of a young person, maybe he's 20, 22, 23 years old, and he learns in yeshiva for a little bit, then he gets a smicha, and then he goes out to some distant corner of planet Earth, and he becomes the chief rabbi of that town or that province. And has he matured? Has he acquired the wisdom? Has he, so to speak, exercise the power of silence and of learning, like Rabbi Shimon says, kol yamai, to mature years? I'm not so sure. So this is his comment about and that, he says, by the way, that's maybe why it says Shimon Beno. It doesn't say Rabban Shimon. Maybe because he had not yet achieved the eminence, meaning he hadn't seized the title yet at this point. Maybe only when he was, even more mature in years did he, achieve that title. And he stayed in the company of his father and maybe the peers, his father's peers of the older generation. And he adds on something else as well, which I think is very beautiful. We said a few minutes ago that Rav Ovadia Bar Tanura, he says he praises silence as a reference to a person who is provoked, or a person who is very tempted to denounce or to return a rhetorical criticism, and he refrains from doing so. Says the Kerem Hatzvi, that why it's tov laguf, it's good for the body. Very beautiful interpretation. He says, if a person sins, and who doesn't sin? Who is perfect? Who is without transgression, without failing, without forgetfulness, without wrongdoing? No one. So if a person recognizes his wrongdoing, he needs to do tshuva. Part of the tshuva process is, in classic, Musar text, is fasting and self-abnegation. So a person will subject himself to different types of bodily discomfort, and especially fasting without eating, without drinking. So he says, Lo matzah guf tov mishtika. He says, you know what? If a person hears his humiliation, if a person is criticized, maybe wrongly, and he doesn't respond in kind and sort of, get down into the gutter with his critic. He doesn't. He desists from doing so. That feeling of humiliation atones for his sins. And it's a form of atonement which doesn't involve fasting or bodily deprivation. It's a type of atonement that doesn't harm his body, but only kind of, is some psychological pain, and in that way he is it atones for his sins. It doesn't mean a person should subject himself to humiliation and manipulation or dominance by people around him, but it does mean that there is a merit to not perpetuating or escalating the argument, and that merit can take the place of so many fast days and so many other more difficult exercises. And he doesn't say it, but I wrote in my notes, and then subsequently I saw it in one of the other Mefarshim, Tversky brings it, that in the classic Musar texts from medieval times and earlier, we find the value or the importance of fasting as a way of, achieving atonement. Nowadays, we don't favor that so much. There are more effective ways of maybe responding to personal failure. And although the fast days, which are statutory, we still uphold, but we don't encourage taking on voluntary fasts.
Rav?
Yeah.
What about the daily intermittent fasting? 16 hours.
16 hours a day.
18 hours eating, huh?
So let me tell you, if it doesn't leave a person irritable or undermine his functionality, if it doesn't prevent the person from learning Torah and from praying with concentration and from interacting with people in an appropriate way, then it's okay. But for a lot of mere mortals, I'm excluding the fitness gurus. For mere mortals, that kind of pattern can be quite difficult to get used to. But if it works, it's okay. But what the Chavetz Chaim says in the Mishnah Brura is that possibly more effective than a fast from eating and drinking, and even intermittent fasting, is a tanis dibur. Tanis dibur means a fast from speaking, where a person will abstain from speaking for half a day or even the whole day. And that can be a more effective form of atonement. It can be more difficult even than abstaining from food and drink. It doesn't harm his body. On the contrary, it nourishes his soul, and it can enhance his relationship with people around him. And it can teach him the value of speech and the importance of speech, of appropriate speech. So actually, this approach hints, this statement that nothing is better than silence, it can be the best method, not only for preserving peace in my relationship with people around me, but it can even be a means of atonement for my own transgressions, a tanis dibur, a fast of speech, rather than a fast from food. Now the next phrase, moving on, v'lo medrash ikar el ha'ma'aseh. It isn't the interpretation or the elucidation which is the main thing, but rather the deed. It's the action which counts. So the simple meaning of this is very clear. In fact, it's so clear we have to wonder why he even needed to say it. Surely a person who studies Torah, but he doesn't fulfill the Torah, he's a hypocrite, he's maybe abusing the Torah. So no one would suggest that Torah study alone is sufficient without the deeds that go with it. Nevertheless, it's interesting that the Talmud says that study is great because Torah study brings about action. A person cannot keep the mitzvot of the Torah if he doesn't know what they are. A person, even with the best intentions, cannot observe Shabbat properly if he doesn't know the laws of Shabbat, or if he knows, let's say, 20% of them, but 80% he's not familiar with. Of course, there are nuances which a person can study continuously, but the principle, I think, is clear. If a person doesn't study Torah, he can never fulfill the mitzvot of the Torah. Nevertheless, if we consider the impact of the two, surely it has to be the action and the deeds which are essential. And so it says over here, Lo medrash ikar ela hamaaseh. The Mefarshim also say that it refers, Medrash refers to the rabbi who is giving the drasha. That is to say, the one who is speaking, the one who is exhorting his audience, the one who is instructing his community. So more important than what he says is the example that he sets. If he himself lives up, if he exemplifies the values which he teaches or preaches, then he can be effective. But if he preaches beautifully and convincingly and maybe even in an inspired way, but actually his own life falls so far short of those values, then ultimately his effectiveness is going to be perhaps fatally undermined. I heard, though, from Lord Jacobovitz, I don't know whether you remember him, he was the chief rabbi here for many years. He died some years ago. He was the first chief rabbi to be ennobled, and we knew him quite well. His brother, he had an older brother who was a rabbi in Montreal, and I just want to mention that he was the father, Zichron Levrach, the father of Chani Seliger, who is married to Danny Seliger, should have a refuah shlema. So Ruthie wrote to Chani Seliger, just asked for her father's name, because although I remember meeting him, I didn't get his name. I knew he was the brother of Lord Jacobovitz, and his name was Rabbi George Jacobovitz, and Zichron Levracha. So it should be a refuah shlema for Danny and for Eli Seliger. So I told Ruthie that I'm going to quote Chani Seliger's father, if you could just ask her what her father's name was. So she was very interested in it. What I want to quote in his name was just a kind of a quip, but I like it very much. He says, Lo ha-medrash iker el ha-ma'aseh. He says, people don't want to hear a drasha. They're not interested in the brilliant homiletics. They want just a maisa. If you tell them a story, that will keep them happy. They're more interested in the story than in the message that goes with it, which probably is very true. So Lo medrash iker el hamaisa. That's what he said to me. I met him about 30 years ago. In a more serious vein, though, I saw a beautiful interpretation of this phrase, La medrash iker el hamaisa, in the commentary of Rabbi Pinto. I've mentioned in the past because I've been reading his commentary this year in preparation for our shiur. Rabbi David Pinto, who comes to Kesher pretty much every year. So he's very prolific. He's written many books, and years ago he gave me his parish on Pirkei Avot, and the time has come for me to enjoy studying it. Has a beautiful interpretation. There's a famous Gemara, one of the very famous Gemaras that we remember every year on Shavuos time. The Gemara in Shabbos Daf Peiches 88b. The Daf Yomi team will get there before long. So there the Gemara says that when Moshe Rabbeinu ascended to the heavens and to the top of Har Sinai, and he was in the realm of the Almighty and the heavenly host and the angels. So the angels said to God, "What is this son of woman doing here? Ma liilud isha, the man born through human biological processes in our spiritual realm. What's he doing here?" So Hashem said he's come to take the Torah. So the angels were mortified. They said the Torah, which was created before the creation of the world, and a lot of other midrashic comments, he's going to take it. You're proposing to give it to him. So Hashem said to Moshe, respond to them. So Moshe said, I'm afraid they're going to burn me with the fire of their breath. So Hashem said, no, you've got to respond. I'm not going to explain to them. I'm not going to justify it. You've got to justify it. He says, hold on to my heavenly throne. So he held on to the throne of Hashem, and Moshe said to the angels, what does it say in the Torah? Honor your parents. It says in the Torah, 6 days you shall work, rest on the seventh day. It says in the Torah, do not covet, do not steal. These are one of the things that it says in the Torah. I think he was just referring specifically to the Ten Commandments, even obviously all the rest of the Torah as well. Said to the angels, do you have a father and a mother? Do you work 6 days? Do you rest on the seventh? Do you covet one another? Are you envious of one another? Is there thievery or duplicity in your realm? So Hashem said to the angels, he's right. The Torah is more suited to them than it is to you. I'm giving them the Torah. So all the Mefarshim wonder, what's the meaning of this exchange? Surely there's nothing in the Torah which is appropriate to angels. The whole Torah is about people. It's about Jewish people, about the rest of mankind. It's about the fall of man. It's about how man can recover his greatness, how he can achieve his destiny. It's all about man and women. There's nothing about angels in the Torah. I mean, a few times the angels appear just as divine emissaries for the purpose of mankind. So it's obvious the Torah is all for people, not for angels. So the Mefarshim say, and this is what Rabbi Pinto develops, and he relates it to our Mishnah, Lo Hamedrash Ikar HaMaaseh, that what the Talmud is telling us here is that Moshe Rabbeinu had to demonstrate that he realized the essence of the Torah. The essence of the Torah is the practical fulfillment of the Torah. The angels, from their perspective, they view the Torah as something holy. God is holy, the Torah is holy, the angels are holy, and these holy entities are associated with one another. So even though the Torah has a lot of mitzvot in it, but the essence of the Torah is the holiness. It's the will of God, the wisdom of God. Says the Talmud that Moshe had to demonstrate that even though the Torah is a reflection of the divine wisdom, but nevertheless, the content of the Torah, the purpose of the Torah for which it was given to the Jewish people is to fulfill their mitzvot. And a person can possibly become so caught up and so inspired by the philosophy or by the Kabbalistic teachings, by the secrets of the Torah, even the aura of the Torah, the light of the Torah, a person can become so attracted to that he can neglect the actual practical fulfillment of the Torah. And this is a genuine risk which is not unknown even in our generation. So that's what the Talmud is teaching us here, that Moshe had to demonstrate that he recognizes that. So that's how Rabbi Pinto explains this phrase, Lo Hamedrash Ikar El HaMaaseh, that a person should not become so enthralled with the wisdom of the Torah and the teachings of the Torah in the sense of the insight, and lose awareness of the responsibility to actually incorporate the prescriptions of the Torah in our lives. It's a subtle distinction, but I think it is a valid distinction. Our time is nearly up, so I want to also talk a
Sorry,
little.
Ralph,
Yeah.
sorry. Isn't that then both an insight and obviously insight goes with the application as well, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're absolutely
Knowledge,
right.
knowledge,
Yeah,
knowledge is no good on its own without knowledge and application of the knowledge.
that's correct. But what we're saying, I absolutely agree. What we're saying here is something a bit more subtle beyond that, beyond your observation, that it's possible for a person to let's say, enjoy or value the Torah for the philosophy and for the secrets of the Torah, and
Sorry?
for a person can appreciate or value or enjoy the philosophy of the Torah or the Kabbalistic teachings of the Torah, but fail to recognize that the Torah has a prescription for how he should live his life as well.
Okay, so I'm just going to bring up a question about it. So, okay. Somebody's learning all day and he's studying Mishnah Berurah or the Gemara, the Talmud. Isn't that the same then? Because if he's stuck there 8 hours a day and he's not there and he knows he's maybe he's got to go out there and panasa and he's just getting mental stimulation, what's the difference?
I think you're right, David. I would agree that there can be a certain tendency to immerse oneself in the study of Torah and maybe limit one's life activities to the theoretical and to the wisdom rather than the fulfillment and the application. What I'm criticizing, though, here is the perspective or the approach to the Torah, which is not really interested in how the Torah instructs me to lead my life, and is only interested in the sort of philosophy or
sugar.
That's right, the shiur, and is missing the main part. But I do agree with what you say, that there can be a certain mindset that emphasizes the study of Torah and doesn't really sort of concern itself that much with the application. Okay, so I think we're in agreement here. I don't want to run over time, so let's try to finish up, because the last phrase here is important as well. And whoever speaks at length, he just invites a transgression. So just very briefly, the Mefarshim say here that this is a remez, this hints to a particular example of someone who said more than she should have said, and that brought about a catastrophic sin. Who am I referring to? I gave you the hint already in the use of the feminine.
Miriam.
Not Miriam. That's a good guess. Miriam, she did get herself into trouble, but here it's mar b'dvarem. She said more than she should have said. It's a bit subtle. Which of our scholars can tell me? I'm just looking at the participants here to see who to call on. Okay, because the time is late. So it refers to Eve. Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, Eve, Chava, was approached by the serpent, and the serpent sought to seduce her. And he said to her, did God say you're not allowed to eat from this tree? Or did God say you're not allowed to eat from the trees of the garden? So she said, no, we're allowed to eat from all the trees of the garden. It's just this one tree. God said, don't eat from it and don't touch it. Velo sigabo. Now, God didn't say don't touch it. God said don't eat from it. She said don't touch it. And because of that, according to the Medrash, the serpent pushed her against the tree and nothing happened. So the serpent said, you see, you touched the tree, nothing happened to you. Just like nothing will happen from touching it, nothing will happen from eating it. And she exposed herself to that trap because she said we were commanded not to touch it, but which wasn't true. God never commanded don't touch it. That's what the Bartanura says, that if you add on to the Torah, then you're just exposing yourself to either you're going to be trapped or you're going to trap yourself or something like that. Basically, don't add on to the Torah. And that she brought about the great transgression. Others say, in a very practical vein, that if a person praises someone, if I'm in a group and I praise someone who's not with us, then even though my intention is to tell of his accomplishments, to praise him rather than to denigrate him, it's human nature that someone else will say, well, maybe he did that was right, but he's not very good in another way. So if I say someone, he's such a great father, I saw him, he looks after his children and he raises them so effectively. So someone else will say, yeah, but he's not a very good husband. Or someone will say, yeah, but his business practices are suspect. Now, maybe it's true, maybe it isn't true, but by kind of opening the door to talking about someone else, unfortunately, one thing can lead to another in a negative way. That's called hamar bedvar mevi chet. He hasn't done anything wrong in the microcosm, but the human nature and the way things can develop is that from beginning to praise a person, either the speaker himself or others around him will ultimately come to denigrate him. And if this is true, or was true, let's say in Talmudic times, how much more true is it in modern times? We've got the telephone as a means of Lashon Hara, plus the fax machines, if you remember them, if you're old enough to remember fax machines. Then you've got email, and what about Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube? The list goes on. The capacity for expressing words and multiplying words is almost without the precedent. It is without precedent for us nowadays, which means we have to be all the more conscious of the warning of the Mishnah called Hamar B'Dvarim Mevi Chet. I want to just end with a final thought from Kerem Hatzvi. He says, what sin does he bring? So he quotes something which he says it's mentioned in the holy books. He's not quite sure the source of it, actually. I've also come across, I also can't remember the source exactly, but we have the notion that if a person speaks Lashon Hara about someone else, then after 120 years, he, the speaker, will be called to account for the sins of the person about whom he spoke Lashon Hara. And conversely, if a person is careful never to speak Lashon Hara, then even the transgressions that he may have committed, they won't be activated against him, because since he never denigrated anyone else, so the heavenly accuser will have no means of bringing to the heavenly court all of his transgressions. The idea like it's measure for measure. A person who sometimes or maybe even habitually denigrates others, when he gets up to heaven, the accuser will have a long laundry list of his transgressions, and he'll even add to it the sins of the people that this person denigrated. So according to this, if you denigrate others, if you speak Lashon Hara about others, you will invoke their sins upon yourself. You'll be held accountable for their sins, because since you're so quick to denigrate or to denounce someone else, in Shamayim, in heaven, they will denounce you as well. So this is a midrashic approach, but again, it's a way of highlighting the peril of Kol Hamar Medvarim Mevichet. So thank you for this. I'm sorry we've gone over a few minutes, and especially of the irony, because we're praising silence, and I'm afraid I may have been guilty of Mar Bedvarim, of speaking too many words. But next week we'll learn about the 3 pillars upon which the earth